Case 1. Corrinne O'Connor. November 27, 2023. Jackson County, Missouri. There are moments in the course of an investigation when the evidence does not simply point toward a conclusion, it demands one. When detectives and prosecutors in Jackson County, Missouri sat down with the physical record of what happened inside a downtown Kansas City high-rise on the evening of November 27, 2023, the documentation they reviewed was not ambiguous. It was not a matter of conflicting witness accounts or circumstantial fragments that required careful interpretation. What they found, piece by piece, was a systematic record of failure, a record that would ultimately lead a woman named Corrinne O'Connor to stand before a judge and answer for the death of her 5-year-old son, Grayson O'Connor. Kansas City is a city of neighborhoods. It is a city of deep community roots, of families who have built lives along the banks of the Missouri River for generations. It is also a city, like every major American city, that has learned in the hardest possible ways that danger does not always arrive from the outside. Sometimes the most devastating harm to a child comes not from a stranger, not from the street, but from within the walls of the place that child calls home. The Grand Boulevard Lofts is a residential high-rise in the heart of downtown Kansas City. It is a modern building, the kind of urban residential tower that has become increasingly common as young families and working professionals seek the convenience of city center living. On the evening of November 27, 2023, it was the address where Corrinne O'Connor lived with her son Grayson, a boy who had only recently turned 5 years old, a boy at the very beginning of his understanding of the world around him. What happened that evening began not with an act of sudden violence, but with a series of decisions, choices that Corrinne O'Connor made deliberately, methodically, and without any apparent recognition of the catastrophic risk she was creating for her child. Investigators would later establish through landlord records, building maintenance logs, and physical evidence collected from the apartment that O'Connor had taken deliberate action to remove a critical safety feature from the window of her 17th floor unit. Window safety stops, sometimes called window restrictors or window guards, are standard safety mechanisms installed in residential buildings precisely because windows at elevation represent one of the most serious and well-documented hazards for young children. Every year, child safety organizations and pediatric medical researchers publish data on the preventable tragedies that occur when young children gain unsupervised access to open windows at height. Building codes in major American cities have long required window safety devices in residential units where children reside, and the Grand Boulevard Lofts had such devices properly installed. Corrinne O'Connor removed hers entirely. This was not an accident. This was not a malfunction. The physical evidence recovered by investigators, the hardware, the mounting points, the absent mechanism itself, confirmed that the window safety stop had been deliberately uninstalled. The window could be opened fully, from floor level, with nothing between a small child and a 17-story drop to the street below. What investigators and the court record would also establish was that on the evening of November 27, 2023, Grayson O'Connor was not adequately supervised. A 5-year-old child, naturally curious, naturally exploratory, naturally drawn to the large window of a high-floor apartment, was left without the supervision that his age and developmental stage required. And in the absence of that supervision, and in the absence of the safety mechanism that should have been there to protect him, Grayson reached the window. He reached it, and he fell. The first person to find Grayson O'Connor was not his mother. It was not a family member. It was not anyone who knew him. It was a passerby on the street below, a stranger who happened to be in the vicinity of the Grand Boulevard Lofts that evening and encountered a scene that no person should ever have to witness. That passerby contacted emergency services. They made the call that Corrinne O'Connor never made. Let that detail settle for a moment, because it is one of the most revealing facts in this entire case. A stranger, someone with no relationship to Grayson, no knowledge of who he was or where he lived, someone who simply happened to be walking past. That person did the thing that a child's own mother did not do. They called for help. By the time emergency personnel arrived on the scene, it was too late for Grayson O'Connor. The injuries he sustained were not survivable. He was 5 years old. Investigators immediately began working to establish what had happened. The physical evidence at the scene and within the apartment was processed. Building management was interviewed. The maintenance and installation records for the window safety devices throughout the building were reviewed. And what emerged from that investigation was a picture that left prosecutors with little room for interpretation. Corrinne O'Connor had created the conditions that led to her son's death. She had removed the protection that was specifically designed to prevent exactly this kind of tragedy. She had not supervised a 5-year-old child near a fully open window on the 17th floor. And when the unthinkable result of those choices came to pass, she had not called for help. The case moved through the Jackson County court system over the months that followed. The legal process in cases involving the death of a child is rarely swift, and this case was no exception. Prosecutors, defense attorneys, investigators, and the court all had roles to play in determining exactly what charges were appropriate and what the evidentiary record could support. On March 16, 2026, that process reached its conclusion. Corrinne O'Connor stood before a judge in Jackson County and entered a guilty plea to first-degree involuntary manslaughter. The court accepted that plea, and the sentence was handed down immediately: 10 years in the Missouri state prison system. 10 years. That is the legal accounting for the life of Grayson O'Connor, a 5-year-old boy who loved the world with the uncomplicated openness that only very young children possess. A boy who deserved supervision, protection, and the basic safety measures that every child has a right to expect within the walls of their own home. The case of Corrinne O'Connor is not just a story about one family's tragedy. It is a story about accountability, about the legal system's capacity to look at a set of facts, follow the evidence, and arrive at a verdict that holds a parent responsible for the consequences of their choices. The Jackson County court system did that work. Prosecutors presented the evidence. A guilty plea was entered. Accountability was established. Grayson O'Connor was 5 years old when he lost his life on November 27, 2023. His name deserves to be remembered not as a footnote in a criminal proceeding, but as the center of this story. A child who mattered, whose life had value, and whose absence leaves a permanent mark on the city where he lived. For any family navigating concerns about child safety in residential settings, the National Safe Kids organization provides comprehensive resources on window safety, fall prevention, and home hazard assessment. These resources are freely available and can help families ensure that their homes are as safe as possible for the children in their care. If this story moved you, if the life of Grayson O'Connor means something to you, please take a moment right now to like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Your support allows this channel to continue telling the stories of victims who deserve to be remembered. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Case 2, Aushena Warren. June 17, 2017. Platte County, Missouri. There are cases in the true crime record that resist easy categorization. Cases where the horror of what occurred exists in direct tension with the chaos and despair that preceded it. The case of Aushena Warren, which unfolded in the Kansas City area on June 17, 2017, is one of those cases, and it is one that the Missouri court system, after years of legal proceedings and appeals, ultimately resolved with a verdict that reflected the full weight of what a child named Audric Warren was put through on that day. To understand this case fully, it is important to understand something about context, not as an excuse, because the court ultimately found that no context justified what happened, but as the kind of background that investigators and prosecutors painstakingly assembled in order to understand the full picture of what had brought a mother to this point. Aushena Warren was a mother living in the Kansas City metropolitan area in 2017. Court records and investigative documents that emerged during the legal proceedings described a woman who had reached a point of profound crisis, financial desperation, emotional collapse, and a state of mind that had become completely untethered from rational decision-making. A handwritten note discovered at the scene described financial distress in terms that investigators characterized as a farewell letter, a document written by someone who had concluded that there was no path forward for herself or her children. What Aushena Warren chose to do with that conclusion on June 17, 2017, is the center of this case. According to the investigative record and the subsequent court proceedings, Warren administered liquid cold medication to her children in quantities that were not therapeutic, quantities designed to sedate them, to render them unable to resist what she had already decided was going to happen. Her 8-year-old son, Audric, and her 6-year-old son were both given this medication. Both children were incapacitated. What followed with respect to Audric Warren is among the most heartbreaking sequences of events in the Missouri court record from that period. His mother, the person who had brought him into the world, forced him into a bathtub, and there, she held him under the water. Audric Warren, 8 years old, did not survive. Warren also moved against her younger son. Court documents established that she attempted to use a pillow to prevent the 6-year-old from surviving as well. Her younger son, unlike his brother, survived, a fact that would become significant both to investigators building their case and to the legal proceedings that followed. After completing these acts, Aushena Warren made her way to the Kit Bond Bridge, a structure that spans the Missouri River in Kansas City. She jumped from the bridge into the water below. The Missouri River at that location is deep, cold, and actively managed. The Kansas City Fire Department, which maintains water rescue capabilities, responded with remarkable speed. Warren was pulled from the river alive. She was in custody before the day was over. The investigation that followed was thorough and methodical. Investigators worked to reconstruct the full sequence of events: the medication, the sequence in which the children were harmed, the note, the bridge, the rescue. Physical evidence, medical evidence, the testimony of first responders, and the records of the fire department's rescue operation all formed the basis of a case that prosecutors would ultimately take to the courtroom. The legal proceedings in the case of Aushena Warren were neither brief nor simple. Cases involving questions of mental state, crisis, and the degree of premeditation involved in a parent's actions against their children are among the most legally complex in the criminal justice system. Defense attorneys and prosecutors spent years working through the evidentiary record, the mental health evaluations, and the applicable Missouri statutes. On November 2, 2021, more than 4 years after the events of June 17, 2017, Aushena Warren entered a guilty plea. The sentence imposed was life in prison. That was not the end of the legal process. In the years following the sentence, Warren's legal team pursued appeals through the Missouri court system, challenging aspects of the proceedings and the sentence. The Missouri Court of Appeals reviewed the case and, on July 15, 2025, issued its final ruling, denying Warren's appeal and leaving the life sentence fully in place. The denial of that final appeal represents the conclusion of a legal journey that began in the worst possible circumstances and ended with the court system affirming that Aushena Warren would be held accountable for what happened to Audric Warren on June 17, 2017. Audric Warren was 8 years old. He was a child who deserved protection, safety, and a future. He did not receive any of those things. What he received instead was a betrayal so profound that the Missouri court system spent years carefully working through the legal mechanisms available to it in order to impose the most serious accountability it could. His younger brother survived. What that child has carried since June 17, 2017, what the rest of his life has looked like in the shadow of what happened to him and to his brother, is something the public record cannot fully capture. But the fact of his survival and the fact that investigators were able to speak with him was part of what made accountability in this case possible. The Kit Bond Bridge still stands over the Missouri River in Kansas City. Fire and rescue personnel still work the water on that river every day. On June 17, 2017, they pulled Aushena Warren from that river and returned her to a justice system that would ultimately hold her to account for what she had done. That is accountability. That is what the legal system is designed to produce. And in this case, after years of proceedings and appeals, it produced it. Audric Warren deserved better. He deserved a future. The court record will carry his name forward as the victim at the center of this case. Not a statistic, not a detail in a legal filing, but a child. An 8-year-old boy. His life mattered. If this story has moved you, please like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Every subscription supports the work of telling these stories with the seriousness and the dignity they deserve. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell. Case 3, Ashley Parmeley. May 28, 2024. Jefferson County, Missouri. There are moments in the work of law enforcement, moments that even experienced investigators describe as unlike anything they have encountered before, when a case arrives not through a tip line, not through a 911 call, not through the discovery of evidence, but through the front door of the police station itself. What happened in Festus, Missouri on May 28, 2024, was one of those moments. At some point during the late morning hours of that day, a woman walked into the Festus Police Department. She was soaking wet. The description provided by officers who were present at the station at that moment, and who would later provide accounts to investigators and to the court, was of a woman who appeared to have come directly from the water, who made no effort to conceal what she had done, and who, within moments of entering the building, began to speak. Her name was Ashley Parmeley, and what she told the officers at the Festus Police Department on May 28, 2024, set in motion one of the most complex and deeply troubling investigations in Jefferson County's recent history. Parmeley informed officers that she had harmed her children. She did not hedge. She did not deflect. She told them what she had done. Investigators immediately mobilized, because a confession of that nature, delivered spontaneously, without prompting, by a woman who had walked into a police station in wet clothes, required an immediate and comprehensive response. What they found in the hours that followed confirmed the broad outline of what Parmeley had told them, and the details were devastating. Parmeley's 9-year-old daughter, Scarlett, was found not in the family home, but in the trunk of Parmeley's vehicle, at a location separate from the police station. Investigators determined that Scarlett had been shot. She was 9 years old, and she had lost her life before her mother had ever walked through the doors of the Festus Police Department. Parmeley's 2-year-old son, Isaac, was found at a different location, a resort patio pool. Investigators determined that Isaac, just 2 years old, had been drowned in that pool. Like his sister, Isaac was gone before his mother surrendered herself to law enforcement. The sequence of events that Ashley Parmeley described to investigators, and that the physical evidence ultimately corroborated, painted a picture of actions carried out deliberately, at multiple locations, with a degree of methodical progression that made the case extraordinarily difficult to process, both for investigators doing their jobs and for the broader community that became aware of what had happened. Scarlett had been 9 years old. She was at an age where children begin to truly understand the world around them, where friendships deepen, where school becomes a place of identity as much as learning, where the future begins to come into focus as something real and reachable. Scarlett Parmeley's future was taken from her. Isaac had been 2 years old. 2 years old. At that age, a child's entire world is the people immediately around them, their primary caregivers, the faces they trust most completely in the world. Isaac's trust was absolute and unconditional. It was also, in the end, the thing that made him most vulnerable to what happened to him at that resort pool. Jefferson County prosecutors and the defense legal team engaged in extensive legal proceedings in the months following May 28, 2024. A case of this nature, one involving a mother, multiple child victims, and questions that cut to the heart of criminal responsibility and mental health, required careful, exhaustive legal work on both sides. The question of mental state became central to the proceedings. Missouri law, like the laws of most states, provides a specific legal framework for cases where a defendant's mental condition at the time of the alleged offense is so severely compromised that they cannot be held criminally responsible in the traditional sense. The legal standard, not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect, is not a path to freedom. It is a path to a different kind of accountability, one that involves indefinite commitment to a psychiatric facility rather than incarceration in the traditional criminal justice system. On August 13, 2025, 14 months after Parmeley walked into the Festus Police Department dripping wet and began to speak, a Jefferson County judge officially accepted a plea of not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect. Ashley Parmeley was committed to the custody of the Missouri Department of Mental Health. That commitment is indefinite. She will remain in the custody of the mental health system for as long as the courts and mental health professionals determine that she poses a risk to herself or others. The legal outcome in this case is not a resolution that everyone will find satisfying. The nature of mental health defenses in criminal proceedings is one of the most contested areas of American law precisely because it sits at the intersection of justice, medicine, and deeply held moral instincts about accountability. What the Jefferson County Court determined was that the evidence supported the conclusion that Ashley Parmeley's mental state at the time of these events was so severely compromised that the traditional framework of criminal culpability did not apply. What is not contested, and what the court record will carry forward permanently, is the reality of what happened to Scarlett Parmeley and to Isaac Parmeley. 2 children, a 9-year-old girl and a 2-year-old boy. They are gone. They are mourned. They are remembered. The circumstances that led Ashley Parmeley to that police station in Festus on May 28, 2024, the conditions, the crisis, the collapse of whatever equilibrium had previously existed in her life, will continue to be evaluated and treated within the Missouri mental health system. The court system has placed her in that system indefinitely. The story of what happened to her children, and what that means for the community and for the systems designed to protect families in crisis, is one that advocates, policymakers, and mental health professionals across Missouri will be reckoning with for years to come. Scarlett, Isaac, their names belong in the record. If this story has stayed with you, please like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. This channel is dedicated to the stories of victims who deserve to be remembered, and your support makes that work possible. Please subscribe and hit the notification bell. Case 4, Krista Roy. September 27, 2025. St. Charles County, Missouri. There is a particular kind of dread that experienced law enforcement officers describe when a welfare check, one of the most routine calls in policing, turns into something that no amount of professional preparation fully equips a person to handle. The welfare check that brought St. Charles County law enforcement to a residence in St. Charles, Missouri on September 27, 2025, was that kind of call. The request had come from friends of a 16-year-old named Carter Bennett, who had gone silent in the way that people only go silent when something is wrong. Not the silence of a busy weekend or a lost phone, but the silence that accumulates over enough hours and enough unanswered messages to make the people who care about you afraid. Carter's friends made a decision that took courage, and they contacted authorities. They asked someone to go check on him. What officers found when they arrived at the residence was not what any welfare check is supposed to find. Carter Bennett was in his bed. He was 16 years old, and he had been there for long enough that the physical evidence of time was unmistakable. He was gone. The investigation that followed moved with the urgency that a case of this nature demands. St. Charles County investigators began the work of reconstructing what had happened and, critically, what the woman at the center of this case, Krista Roy, Carter's mother, had done and when she had done it. What emerged from that investigation and what would be reflected in the formal charging documents filed on September 30, 2025, was a sequence of events that challenged investigators on every level. Court records and charging documents established that Krista Roy had made a deliberate decision prior to September 27th. She had purchased a firearm. The stated purpose, as investigators established through the evidence and Roy's own admissions, was to take both Carter's life and her own. This was not an impulsive act. It was planned. The acquisition of the weapon required a deliberate decision, a deliberate act, and a deliberate intent. On September 27, 2025, while Carter Bennett slept, Krista Roy used that firearm on her son. He was shot multiple times. What happened next is one of the most harrowing details in the entire case record. Carter Bennett, 16 years old and gravely wounded, regained consciousness. He called out to his mother. The word he used, the word documented in the charging materials, was Mommy. Krista Roy did not call for emergency services. She did not attempt to get help for her son. According to the charging documents, she lay down next to him. She held him. And then she retrieved a kitchen knife, and she used it to ensure that Carter would not survive. Carter Bennett was 16 years old. He was at an age where young people are forming their identities, discovering who they are, beginning to understand the kind of adult they want to become. He was old enough to have friends who cared about him enough to make a phone call when he went quiet. He was old enough that those friends' instincts were right, and their courage in contacting authorities was the act that brought accountability into motion. The formal charges filed against Krista Roy on September 30, 2025, reflect the gravity of what the evidence established. She faces first-degree murder and armed criminal action. She was held on a bond of $1 million cash, a figure that reflects the court's assessment of the seriousness of the charges and the risk she represents. As of the time this episode was produced, the case of Krista Roy remains in the pretrial phase. She has been charged. She is in custody. The legal proceedings that will ultimately determine the outcome of this case are ongoing, and the St. Charles County court system will carry that process forward. What is not pending, what is already fully established in the public record, is the reality of Carter Bennett's absence. His friends noticed when he went quiet. They made the call. They did the right thing. And what investigators found when they responded to that call is now a matter of permanent record in St. Charles County, Missouri. Carter Bennett was 16 years old. He deserved a future. He deserved the adulthood that was ahead of him, the experiences, the relationships, the discoveries that make a human life. None of that was available to him after September 27, 2025. The case against Krista Roy will move through the court system. The evidence that investigators assembled will be presented. The legal process will take its course. For Carter, it is the only form of accountability remaining. If Carter's story has moved you, if his name means something to you, please like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Your support keeps this channel going and ensures that victims like Carter are never forgotten. Subscribe now. Case 5, Mariah Thomas. February 9, 2024. Jackson County, Missouri. Some cases enter the national consciousness not gradually, but all at once, arriving with a force that stops people mid-scroll, mid-conversation, mid-breath. The case of Mariah Thomas and the death of 1-month-old Zariah May, which came to light in Kansas City, Missouri on February 9, 2024, was one of those cases. It moved across national news platforms with a speed that reflected the sheer incomprehensibility of what investigators had found, and it left communities, in Kansas City, across Missouri, across the country, searching for words that simply did not exist. Zariah May was 1 month old. 30 days. At 1 month, an infant's entire existence is sensation and connection, the warmth of being held, the sound of a familiar voice, the basic biological rhythms of feeding and sleep. A 1-month-old child has no capacity to protect themselves from anything. They exist in a state of complete dependence on the adults in their world. Zariah May was completely dependent on Mariah Thomas. On February 9, 2024, emergency services were called to a home in Kansas City. What officers and first responders found when they arrived was Zariah May, 1 month old, bearing injuries that investigators and medical professionals immediately identified as severe thermal trauma. The infant had not survived. The investigation moved immediately into the process of establishing what had happened, how a 1-month-old child in a residential home had sustained the injuries that led to her death. In the course of that investigation, officers spoke with Mariah Thomas. What Thomas told investigators became the statement at the center of this case. According to the account she provided to police, she had intended to place Zariah May in her crib for a nap. She stated that she had made a mistake, that she had, without realizing it, placed the infant inside the preheated kitchen oven instead. The statement was documented. It was reviewed. It became the focal point of the subsequent investigation and the charging decisions that followed. The Jackson County prosecution team reviewed the evidence, the medical findings, the physical evidence from the home, and Thomas's statement. The charges that resulted reflect Missouri's legal framework for cases involving the death of a child through the actions or inactions of a caregiver. Thomas was charged with a Class A felony of first-degree endangering the welfare of a child, with the specification that the conduct resulted in death. Under Missouri law, a Class A felony carries the most serious potential penalties in the non-capital sentencing range. The case of Mariah Thomas is one where the legal proceedings, as of the time this episode was produced, remain active. Thomas is undergoing mental health evaluations as part of the legal process. Evaluations that will inform the court's understanding of her mental state and the applicable legal framework for her case going forward. The Jackson County court system will continue to move this case through the legal process, and the outcome of those proceedings will determine what accountability looks like for the loss of Zariah May. Zariah May was 1 month old. Her name was given to her by people who presumably had hopes and dreams for her future, who looked at her 30 days into her life and saw the beginning of a person. She was completely innocent. She had done nothing in her brief time in this world except exist and breathe and be. She deserved protection. She deserved the decades of life that were ahead of her. The national attention this case received reflects something important about the capacity for empathy that exists in communities across this country. Strangers who had never been to Kansas City, who had never heard of Zariah May before February 9, 2024, stopped what they were doing and felt something. That feeling, that collective recognition of a life lost and the profound wrongness of how it was lost, is part of what drives the work of documenting these cases with the seriousness and dignity they demand. Mariah may deserve more than 30 days. The Jackson County court system carries the responsibility of ensuring that her brief life is answered with the full weight of legal accountability that Missouri law provides. For families navigating questions about infant care resources, postpartum support, and crisis intervention services, the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week at 1-800-422-4453. These resources exist precisely for families in crisis, and reaching out is always the right choice. If Mariah May's story has moved you, please like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. These stories deserve to be told with care and with purpose, and your support makes that possible. Please subscribe and share this video. Case 6, Raeleena Barlett. May 6, 2023. Jackson County, Missouri. The discovery on May 6, 2023, did not come through an official investigation. It did not come through a tip called into a police hotline. It came the way so many discoveries in urban communities come, through the eyes of an ordinary person going about their day who encountered something in a wooded lot along Pittman Road in Kansas City that stopped them completely. A citizen, an unnamed member of the Kansas City community who happened to be in the vicinity of that wooded lot on that day, the Saturday of Mother's Day weekend, 2023. What they found there, and what they had the presence of mind and the moral clarity to report, set in motion an investigation that would ultimately lead to criminal charges against a woman named Raeleena Barlett. What the citizen discovered was concealed within plastic trash bags. The remains were those of a 6-month-old infant. The infant was Kalia, the daughter of Raeleena Barlett. The Kansas City Police Department responded to the scene and immediately began the process of investigating the death and the circumstances that had led to an infant's remains being found in a wooded lot, wrapped in plastic bags, a week after she had reportedly passed away. The investigation involved collecting evidence from the scene, engaging the medical examiner's office, and interviewing Raeleena Barlett herself. What Barlett told investigators forms the basis for understanding how this case developed and why the charges ultimately filed were what they were, rather than something more serious. Barlett acknowledged that Kalia had passed away while in her care approximately 1 week before the discovery on Pittman Road. The infant had been found unresponsive in her bed. What Barlett said she experienced in that moment was panic, an overwhelming, paralyzing fear that caused her to make a decision that no parent should ever make. Rather than contacting emergency services, rather than calling 911 and allowing first responders to respond to her daughter, Barlett wrapped the infant's remains and removed them from the home, eventually concealing them in the wooded lot where the citizen would find them a week later. The medical examiner's office conducted a thorough autopsy. The findings were significant in their limitation as much as in what they established. The autopsy could not prove foul play. The cause of death was ruled undetermined. This is not an uncommon outcome in cases involving infants, where certain causes of death, including sudden unexpected infant death, can leave no definitive physical markers. What the medical examiner's findings meant legally was that prosecutors did not have the evidentiary foundation necessary to pursue homicide charges against Raeleena Barlett. What they did have was the evidence of what happened after Kalia passed away, the decision not to call for help, the decision to conceal, the plastic bags and the wooded lot and the week that elapsed between the infant's death and the citizen's discovery. That evidence supported a charge of abandonment of a corpse, a serious criminal offense under Missouri law, though one that carries a very different weight than a homicide charge. Raeleena Barlett entered a guilty plea to abandonment of a corpse. On April 10, 2026, nearly 3 years after the discovery on Pittman Road, she was sentenced by a Jackson County judge to 3 years of supervised probation. The sentence also included mandatory substance abuse treatment and mandatory mental health treatment as conditions of her probation. The sentence in this case has generated discussion in the Kansas City community and beyond, in the way that any case involving the death of an infant and a relatively limited legal outcome tends to generate discussion. The tension between what the legal system can prove and what the community's moral instincts demand is one of the most persistent tensions in criminal justice, and this case sits squarely within that tension. What the legal record establishes clearly is this: Quatavia Barlett was 6 months old. She passed away, and her mother's response to that loss, whatever combination of panic, fear, impaired judgment, or other factors drove it, was to put her infant daughter in plastic bags and leave her in a wooded lot. Not to call for help, not to allow first responders the chance to respond, not to give Quatavia whatever small chance might have existed if emergency services had been contacted immediately. 6 months old. Quatavia had just begun. The world was just coming into focus for her. 6 months is the age where infants begin to recognize faces, to respond to familiar voices with something that looks very much like joy, to reach out toward the things and the people that interest them. Quatavia deserved the chance to keep reaching. The supervised probation and mandatory treatment programs that form Raeleena Barlett's sentence represent the court's effort to impose accountability within the constraints of what the evidence could support. The memory of Quatavia Barlett belongs to Kansas City, to the community that found her on Pittman Road and made sure her story was not lost in silence. If this story has moved you, please like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Your support ensures that victims like Quatavia are never forgotten. Please subscribe and hit the notification bell. Case 7. Tasha L. Haefs. February 15, 2022. Jackson County, Missouri. In the course of training, law enforcement officers are prepared for many things. They are prepared for confrontation, for danger, for the full range of what human behavior looks like in its most extreme and uncontrolled expressions. What they are not fully prepared for, what no amount of training can fully prepare a person for, is the specific combination of sensory experiences that officers encountered when they responded to a disturbance call at a Kansas City home on February 15, 2022. The call was a disturbance call. That is one of the most common categories of calls that law enforcement responds to in any urban jurisdiction. A neighbor heard something, someone noticed something, a concern was raised about what might be happening inside a residence. Officers respond, they assess, they determine what intervention is needed. It is routine, or it is supposed to be. When officers arrived at the address that February evening, they encountered something before they ever entered the building. Coming from within the residence, audible through the walls and the door, was the sound of a woman singing hymns. Religious music. The kind of devotional singing that, in another context, would be unremarkable. The sound of faith expressed through melody. In this context, with the nature of the call and the circumstances surrounding the residence, it was deeply unsettling to the officers present. They made entry. What they found inside that home on February 15, 2022, is documented in the investigative reports, in the charging materials, and in the subsequent Jackson County Court proceedings. It is documented because documentation is how the legal system processes the things that happen in the world, no matter how incomprehensible those things may be. Tasha L. Haefs was inside the residence, covered in blood. And in that residence, investigators found the remains of her 6-year-old son, Carvel Stevens, and the remains of a family dog. Both had suffered catastrophic injuries that had ended their lives. Carvel Stevens was 6 years old. The investigation into what had happened and what had led to it necessarily involved a deep examination of Tasha Haefs' history, her mental health record, and the circumstances of her life in the period leading up to February 15th. What that examination revealed was a history of severe mental illness, specifically, a pattern of psychosis that investigators and mental health professionals connected to substance use, in addition to underlying psychiatric conditions that had reportedly gone inadequately treated over a period of years. The formal charge brought against Tasha Haefs was first-degree murder. That charge reflects the gravity of what the physical evidence established. A child had lost his life, and the evidence pointed to his mother as the person responsible. But the legal process in Missouri, as in every state, provides for a rigorous assessment of a defendant's mental competency and their capacity to understand the proceedings against them and to participate meaningfully in their own defense. In June of 2022, 4 months after the events of February 15th, a Jackson County judge conducted that assessment with the benefit of mental health evaluations conducted by qualified professionals. The conclusion reached was significant. The judge ruled that Tasha L. Haefs was incompetent to stand trial. The basis for that ruling was her mental illness. The severity of her condition was such that she could not meaningfully understand or participate in the proceedings against her. Incompetency to stand trial is not the same as not guilty. The charge of first-degree murder remains on the legal record. What the competency ruling means is that the case cannot proceed to trial until and unless Haefs' mental condition improves to the point where she can meaningfully participate in her own defense. She was committed to the custody of the Missouri Department of Mental Health, where she remains subject to ongoing evaluation and treatment. The case of Tasha L. Haefs sits in a profound legal and human limbo. The charge is there. The commitment is there. The question of whether she will ever reach a level of competency sufficient to face trial, and what a trial would look like if it occurred, remains open. What is not in limbo is the memory of Carvel Stevens. He was 6 years old on February 15, 2022. He was at the age where children are discovering who they are in the world, building friendships, developing curiosity, asking the endless questions that 6-year-olds ask, because everything is still new and everything is interesting. Carvel deserved every year of life that was ahead of him. He deserved the chance to grow up. The system of mental health treatment and legal oversight that now holds Tasha L. Haefs in its custody carries the responsibility of assessing, evaluating, and making decisions about her future. That system will do its work. The memory of Carvel Stevens demands that the work be done with the seriousness it requires. If this story has stayed with you, please like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Every case we tell on this channel is a story about a real person, a real life, and a real community that deserves to have these stories told with care. Please subscribe now. Case 8, Alyssa Wehmeyer. March 1st through 2nd, 2025. Cape Girardeau County, Missouri. In the landscape of child welfare cases investigated by Missouri law enforcement, the cases that generate the most anguish among investigators are sometimes not the cases involving sudden, dramatic events, but the cases where a child's suffering unfolded slowly across hours, while a caregiver failed to intervene. The case of Alyssa Wehmeyer, investigated by the Missouri State Highway Patrol and the Cape Girardeau County authorities beginning in early March of 2025, is one of those cases. Colt Wehmeyer was 19 months old, a toddler, old enough to walk, old enough to be curious about everything within reach, old enough to have developed the beginning of a personality, the first expressions of individual preference and joy and discomfort. Toddlers at 19 months are just beginning to develop language in earnest, just starting to put the world into words. Colt was at the very beginning of becoming. The Missouri State Highway Patrol's investigation, which got underway after Colt was found to have lost his life, produced findings that investigators described as deeply disturbing in their clarity. The autopsies conducted by medical professionals as part of the investigation established the cause of Colt's death with a specificity that left no room for ambiguity. Colt Wehmeyer did not survive because of profound dehydration and starvation. Those were the findings. Not an accident. Not a sudden medical event. Not something that happened in a moment. What the medical evidence established was a failure of basic care that unfolded across an extended period of time, the kind of failure that requires sustained inattention over many hours. Alyssa Wehmeyer, in the course of the investigation, spoke with investigators and provided her account of what had happened. She acknowledged that she had left Colt unattended inside his crib for a period exceeding 19 hours. She acknowledged that she had failed to feed or provide water to her 19-month-old son for a period exceeding 43 hours. The explanation she offered for this was a severe migraine headache. The investigators who documented this statement, the prosecutors who reviewed it, and the broader legal system that processed this case all had to reckon with the gap between that explanation and what the medical evidence established about Colt's suffering during those 43-plus hours. A toddler who is not fed and not provided water for more than 43 hours does not pass away quietly or peacefully. The body of a 19-month-old child has limited reserves, and the depletion of those reserves is a prolonged and physically desperate process. Wehmeyer was arrested on March 3, 2025, the day after investigators had assembled sufficient evidence to move forward with charges. The charge brought against her was a Class A felony of abuse or neglect of a child resulting in death under Missouri law. A Class A felony represents the most serious level of non-capital felony charge in the Missouri Criminal Code, and the potential sentencing range reflects that gravity. She was held in custody on a bond of $100,000 cash. As of the time this episode was produced, the case remains in the pretrial process, with legal proceedings ongoing in Cape Girardeau County. The Missouri State Highway Patrol's involvement in this case reflects the seriousness with which Missouri's law enforcement apparatus approaches child welfare cases, the deployment of investigative resources and expertise to ensure that cases like this are handled with the thoroughness they demand. Colt Wehmeyer was 19 months old. He was in a crib, the place that is supposed to be the safest place in the world for a toddler, the place specifically designed for their rest and security. He was in that crib for 19-plus hours without the person responsible for his care checking on him. He went more than 43 hours without food or water, and he did not survive. Investigators who work these cases carry the weight of what the evidence tells them. The Missouri State Highway Patrol investigators, the medical examiners, and the Cape Girardeau County prosecutors who have assembled the case against Alyssa Wehmeyer are doing the work that Colt Wehmeyer's brief life demands of them. The legal process will move forward. Accountability will be pursued to the full extent of what Missouri law provides. Colt deserved 19 years, not 19 months. He deserved to grow up, to walk out of that crib under his own power, to see the world beyond those walls. The legal record of Cape Girardeau County, Missouri will carry his name forward. If Colt's story has moved you, please like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. This channel is committed to telling these stories with the dignity every victim deserves. Please subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Case 9, Quatavia Givens. October 25, 2018. Cole County, Missouri. There is a particular dimension of betrayal in a case where a child is placed in harm's way by the very act that is supposed to represent community trust, the act of being cared for by someone outside the immediate family. When parents leave a child with a babysitter, with a neighbor, with a trusted member of the community, they are making a decision rooted in trust. They are extending the circle of safety around their child, acting on the belief that the person they have chosen will protect what they love most. Darnell Gray was 4 years old in October of 2018. He was left in the care of Quatavia Givens on October 25th of that year, in Jefferson City, Missouri. His parents, or the adults responsible for him, trusted that he would be safe. He was not safe. The investigation into Darnell Gray's death, an investigation that would not reach its legal conclusion until May 29, 2026, began in the most painful and deceptive of circumstances. When Darnell Gray was no longer alive, Quatavia Givens did not call for emergency services. She did not contact Darnell's family with the truth of what had happened. Instead, she engaged in a deliberate effort to conceal what she had done. Givens contacted 911 and reported that Darnell Gray had wandered away from her care. She told emergency dispatchers and the officers who responded that the 4-year-old was missing, that he had simply disappeared, walked away, gone somewhere unknown. This was not the truth. What Givens's report triggered was a massive community search operation, the kind of multi-day mobilization that communities generate when a young child is reported missing, when neighbors and volunteers and law enforcement pour their time and energy and hope into the effort to find a child they believe might still be found alive. People in Jefferson City searched for Darnell Gray. They searched because they believed he was out there. They searched because they trusted the account they had been given. Darnell was not missing in the way that Givens had reported. Investigators, working through the evidence and the inconsistencies in Givens's account, ultimately located Darnell Gray's remains. He had not wandered away. He had been hidden, his body packed inside a suitcase and buried in a wooded area. The investigation established that Givens had subjected 4-year-old Darnell to severe physical harm and had smothered him, ending his life while he was in her care on October 25, 2018. She had then engaged in the deliberate concealment of both her actions and his remains, and had actively misdirected the search that followed by reporting him as a missing child. The legal process that followed the discovery of Darnell Gray's remains was a lengthy one. Cases of this nature, involving questions of evidence, intent, and the full scope of the charges warranted, move carefully through the court system, and this case spanned years before reaching its conclusion. On May 29, 2026, 7.5 years after October 25, 2018, Quatavia Givens entered an official guilty plea in Cole County, Missouri. The charges she pleaded guilty to were second-degree murder, child abuse, and abandonment of a corpse. The sentence imposed was 25 years in prison. 25 years. That sentence represents the court's accounting for what was done to Darnell Gray, a 4-year-old boy who was placed in the care of someone his family trusted, who was harmed by that person, whose remains were hidden from the people who loved him, and whose community searched for him with desperate hope while the truth was being concealed. The families who searched for Darnell Gray in those multi-day search efforts in 2018 deserve a particular acknowledgement in this story. They gave their time and their energy and their hearts to finding a child they believed was lost. What they could not know was that the search was built on a lie, that the account that had set it in motion was a deliberate fabrication designed to buy time and misdirect attention. The community of Jefferson City, Missouri showed its best self during those searches. What it was responding to was the worst of what human behavior can be. Darnell Gray was 4 years old. He was at the age where children are pure potential, where everything is still ahead, where the world is a place of endless discovery, and where trust in the adults around you is as natural and unconditional as breathing. His trust was absolute, and it was catastrophically betrayed. The Cole County Court record now carries Quatavia Givens's guilty plea and 25-year sentence as the legal answer to what was done to Darnell Gray. It is the answer that the legal system can provide. Darnell's memory belongs to Jefferson City, to the community that searched for him, and to every person who believes that a 4-year-old child deserves to be safe in the care of the people entrusted with his welfare. If Darnell's story has moved you, please like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. These stories matter. These victims matter. Your subscription supports the work of making sure they are never forgotten. Please subscribe now. Case 10, Jenna Boedecker. July 4, 2018. Clay County, Missouri. The 4th of July is a day that carries a particular weight in American culture. A day associated with community, with family gatherings, with celebration and warmth, and the particular kind of summer feeling that comes with fireworks and the presence of the people you love. In Kearney, Missouri, which sits in Clay County in the northern reaches of the Kansas City metropolitan area, the 4th of July of 2018 began in the heat of a Midwest summer and ended in a way that would occupy the Clay County court system for years. Jenna Boedecker had 2 daughters. Ireland was 2 years old. Goodnight was 8 weeks old. 8 weeks. A span of time so brief that the word infant barely captures how new to the world she was. Both girls were, by any measure, completely dependent on the adults in their lives for everything: warmth, nourishment, safety, the basics of survival. The events leading up to what happened on the 4th of July began with conflict. Court documents and trial testimony established that there was an aggressive domestic altercation involving Jenna Boedecker and her husband. The conflict escalated to the point where Boedecker reportedly threw a brick through a window. It was, by any account, an evening marked by the kind of intense emotional volatility that the legal process would subsequently have to examine in detail. At some point during or following that altercation, Jenna Boedecker placed both of her daughters, 2-year-old Ireland and 8-week-old Goodnight, into her Jeep. What happened next, and the sequence of decisions that followed, is what the Clay County Court ultimately had to evaluate and judge. The vehicle was sealed. The engine was off. The temperature outside on the 4th of July in Kearney, Missouri exceeded 90 degrees Fahrenheit. The interior of a sealed vehicle in those conditions becomes a heat environment that rises to dangerous levels with extraordinary speed, a fact that is the subject of extensive public safety campaigns, that is taught in first responder training, and that is documented in the medical literature as one of the most preventable causes of child fatality. Jenna Boedecker fell asleep inside that vehicle. When morning came, she found her daughters unresponsive. Both girls had suffered severe hyperthermia, the dangerous overheating of the body that occurs when the core temperature rises beyond what human physiology can sustain. Neither Ireland nor Goodnight survived. The investigation that followed and the trial that resulted was a thorough and careful examination of the events of July 4, 2018. The physical evidence, the medical findings, the history of the evening, and the sequence of decisions that led to both children being in a sealed vehicle on a 90-plus degree night were all brought before the jury. The Clay County jury returned a conviction. Jenna Boedecker was found guilty of second-degree murder and child endangerment. The verdict reflected the jury's determination, after hearing all of the evidence, that what happened to Ireland and Goodnight was not a tragic accident, but rather the result of conduct that rose to the level of criminal culpability under Missouri law. On August 3, 2023, 5 years after the 4th of July of 2018, a Clay County judge formally imposed the sentence that followed from that conviction. Jenna Boedecker was sentenced to 58 years in the Missouri state prison system. 58 years. It is a sentence that reflects the magnitude of what was lost on that July night. 2 children, 2 lives, 2 futures. Ireland, who at 2 years old was just beginning to find her words, her independence, her particular way of moving through the world. Goodnight, who at 8 weeks old had barely had the chance to begin at all. The case of Jenna Boedecker became, in the years between the events and the sentencing, a significant point of reference in discussions about child safety in vehicles, a phenomenon that claims the lives of dozens of children in the United States every year. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, child safety advocates, and pediatric medical organizations all maintain extensive resources on vehicle heat safety. And the consistent message from all of those organizations is that no child should ever be left unattended in a vehicle, under any circumstances, in any temperature. Ireland Boedecker and Goodnight Boedecker were both lost on the 4th of July of 2018 in Kearney, Missouri. Their names are in the Clay County court record. Their father, whatever the circumstances of that night's conflict, lost both of his daughters. The community of Kearney and the broader Kansas City metropolitan area lost 2 children who deserved every celebration, every summer, every 4th of July that should have followed. The 58-year sentence imposed by the Clay County Court represents the legal system's full-weight response to what was established at trial. It is the accountability that Ireland and Goodnight deserved, delivered through the deliberate work of investigators, prosecutors, a jury, and a judge who took seriously the responsibility before them. Ireland, Goodnight. Their names deserve to be spoken. Their lives deserve to be lived. If this final story has moved you, if any of the 10 cases documented in this episode have affected you, made you think, made you want to do something, please take that feeling and turn it into action by liking this video and subscribing to Cold Case Hour. Every like, every subscription, every share tells the platform that content like this, content that takes victims seriously, that tells their stories with care and purpose, that holds the record of what happened to them, deserves to reach a wider audience. Please like this video right now. Please subscribe to Cold Case Hour and hit the notification bell so you are notified every time a new episode is published. And please share this video with someone in your life who believes, as this channel believes, that the victims of these cases deserve to have their stories told. If you or someone you know is in crisis, the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline is available around the clock at 1-800-422-4453. Reach out. The call is free. Help us there. Thank you for watching Cold Case Hour. These stories are told in memory of every victim named in this episode: Grayson, Audric, Scarlett, Isaac, Carter, Zariah May, Kalia, Carvel, Colt, Darnell, Ireland, and Goodnight. Their names deserve to endure.